All right, so very good evening to everyone and welcome back to Legacy IAS Academy. Now, in this live session, we will be going through the economic survey 25-26 that has been released by the government, or you can say presented by our Honorable Finance Minister. So this economic survey is arguably the most important document for your UPSC civil services examination, both for your prelims, mains, as well as your personality test. So let us start decoding the entire economic survey. Let us see what is in store for us in this session. So the very first thing is we will see what is the economic survey. Actually, we will see certain static facts with respect to the economic survey as to who brings it out, who publishes it, who are the people who are involved in that, so on and so forth. Then we will also see the changes that has been made in this year's economic survey. So there is a slight change in the format which I will tell you, because prelims related questions can come on that as well. Next, we will look at the preface of the economic survey. Very important. Many a times it so happens that you will go into the chapters of the economic survey, but you may leave out the preface, but the preface also gives you a beautiful informations, things that you can use it in your examination, in your mains answers, as well as things that can be asked in prelims as well. So we will see what it talks about in the preface. And then finally, the biggest part of the session would be the chapter-wise decoding that we will do for this economic survey. So let us get started. So first things first, what is the economic survey? Now, we all might have had our report cards. So what does the report card include? It includes the performance, our academic performance in a particular year in the standard that we are. So 10 standard or 7 standard report card gives you the performance that you have done in 7 standard. And the final report card comes out at the end of that year. That is correct. Now, exactly the same thing is our economic survey. It is nothing but like a report card. It is a report card of what? Of the Indian economy, of course. Now, since it's a report card, that means what? That means it will talk about the things that has already taken place. So it will talk about all the things that have taken place in 2025. But to be very specific, it talks about the 2025-26 fiscal. But since the 26 fiscal is still going on and it is going to end only on 31st of March, so there are around 2 months still remaining. So it will have all the details of this year plus up to the January 2026. It has information, in fact, up to 23rd January. There are certain data which is updated up to 23rd January 2026. So it consists of the report card of the entire Indian economy of the previous year. Now, in contrast to budget, it's talking about the previous year, whereas remember, the budget talks about the future or the coming fiscal year. Now, certain important facts about it. So if we talk about as to who prepares the economic survey, so it's the same as your budget. It is prepared by the economic division of the Department of Economic Affairs. So it is prepared by the economic division under the Department of Economic Affairs. And this Department of Economic Affairs is under the Ministry of Finance. So the flow of preparing this economic survey is exactly the same as your union budget. But remember, here this economic survey is prepared under the guidance of the economic advisor. As you can see here, it is prepared under the guidance of the chief economic advisor of the Indian economy, right? And then subsequently it is presented. So it has been presented today. It was scheduled to be presented at 11. It was presented starting 12 noon today, and that is what we will discuss. And it is presented by whom? It is presented by our Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Finance Minister, that is Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman. Now, further, if we break this economic survey down, it generally consists of 2 volumes. Volume 1 and volume 2. Now what does these volume include? Volume 1 consists of macro level assessment of the economy and how are these macro level figures or facts going to do in the coming year. They talk a bit about that as well, but majorly they assess how the macro level factors have done in the economy. Now what are these macro level factors? For example, your GDP, the GDP growth rate, or your inflation, so on and so forth. All these macroeconomic factors are discussed in volume 1. Then you have your volume 2. Now this volume 2 is basically very highly data intensive. So here is where you will see percentages, numbers, and numbers in high detail talking about sector specific performance, the growth rate, compound annual growth rate, so on and so forth. Now as a UPSC aspirant, you don't have to remember the exact data of each and every sector. As we go through it, I'll tell you what is important to remember, what is not that important. We have included only the things that are important. So sector wise exact quantity of production etc. is not to be remembered, but you definitely have to remember the trend. For example, what has been the trend? For example, current account deficit. If the question may come that since the last 10 years the current account deficit has always been in negative. Is that statement true or false? You should know that. You should not necessarily know the exact percentage, but at least you should know what has happened in the last 10 years, 15 years, whatever the duration the economic survey takes. So these are the 2 volumes which is there in the economic survey. Now, next is the change that has taken place in the economic survey. So what is this change that has taken place? So if you look at the previous year's economic survey, the number of chapters were less. Now they have increased the number of chapters to 17. So now it includes 17 chapters. In fact, you may not find the 17 number over there. However, you have 1 to 15 plus the 16th chapter is divided into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. So since 16th chapter is divided into 2 parts, you can say that this year's economic survey consists of total 17 chapters, which is more than the number of chapters that you have seen in the previous economic survey. So this year's economic survey is bulkier because it talks about more depth and more topics is what it tries to cover. Now, in addition to these chapters, the economic survey this year also includes special essays. So special essays have been included in the economic survey with respect to 3 different topics. First is the evolution of the artificial intelligence. Economic survey talks about this. Next is the challenge of the quality of life in the Indian cities. What challenges do people face in living a quality life in the Indian cities? That is what is discussed. Importance has been given to urbanization and the life of people in the urban area. And the third is the role of the state capacity, the private sector, and not just the state and the private sector, but each individual household as well. So they have included even the household over here. What role does the government play? What role does the or should the private sector play? And what role should the household play? So it is an inclusive effort of everyone involved in India to ensure that India becomes Viksit Bharat, that means developed India by 2047, right? Now let us come on to the preface of the economic survey. As I told that many people just directly jump onto the chapters ignoring the preface, but there are a lot of important things mentioned in the preface as well. So let us see what is mentioned there. The first thing that is mentioned is the reasoning as to why the Indian rupee has fallen. So we have seen that if you consider the time period from November 2024 to around December 2025, so approximately 1 year, or you can say 13 months. During this period, what has happened to the Indian rupee is, Indian rupee here was around $1 was equal to around 84.5 rupees per dollar. However, in the next 13 months, the dollar appreciated and the rupee depreciated, right? And the dollar crossed 90 rupee mark. That means $1 actually became 90 rupees plus. So what is that? That is a high depreciation of the Indian rupee. That means the Indian rupee has depreciated by around 5 rupees. Initially it was 84.9 or 84.5 and then it crossed 90. So more than 5 rupees of depreciation is what we have seen. I'll give you the data quickly again here. So $1, which was around around 84 rupees, it got changed into $1 equal to, or you can say more than 90 rupees. So that's a huge amount of depreciation that we are talking about within a year. So the economic survey explains the reason for this depreciation. Let us see the reasoning of the economic survey. The first thing that they say is that India has a trade deficit in goods. Deficit means deficit is nothing but export minus import. So if your export is less, import is more, you will have a deficit. That means you will have to pay additional dollars than the number of dollars you are earning. Basically, you will have to pay more foreign currency than the foreign currency you earn. We majorly deal in dollars. That is why time and again you will hear dollar instead of foreign currency. So since there is a trade deficit, we export less than the amount that we import. So what will happen? Since we export less, we import more. So for importing, we will have to pay more dollars. And by exporting, we will earn less dollars. As a result of which, we will be giving dollars away on a net basis. So this is one thing. So what will happen? The demand for dollars for us also will increase. We ourselves will start demanding more dollars. When you yourself are starting to demand more dollars, what will happen? The demand for the dollars is going to go up. When the demand for the dollar goes up, what happens? The rupee against it is going to depreciate. So this is one big concern, the trade deficit in goods that is there. Now India, however, as far as the services are concerned, in services we have a surplus. But the surplus in the services are not enough to offset the deficit in the goods. That means the quantity of deficit in the goods is higher than the quantity of surplus in the services. There has been in the last 10 years, there has been 1 year, in fact 3 years back, there was a situation when the surplus in services was higher than the deficit in goods. But over a period of time, if you look at the last decade's data, generally the deficit in the goods has been higher than the surplus in the services. So we have a net deficit. We have a deficit balance of payment, as a result of which the dollar has kept on appreciating. Now, so as far as trade is concerned, India is not doing well with respect to earning the dollars from the trade of goods and services. So where do we earn it from? We get it from, or we depend from, the foreign capital flow, the foreign investments that come into India. Now, what has happened in the last year is there has been a huge capital outflow from India. That means the foreign exchange or the dollars have flown away from India, as a result of which hitting India even more, because we are dependent on that foreign capital flow. And because of these reasons, we have seen that rupee became the casualty. That means rupee took a hit and it started to depreciate. Now this is what the preface talks about. There are more things that it mentions. Next, it talks about that yes, rupee has depreciated, but the Indian economy is still growing well, right? Now, what are the reasons for that? It talks about certain drivers of the economy. Means the drivers means the factors that are ensuring that Indian economy still keeps on growing. Let us see what are these factors. First is the domestic demand. The domestic demand. There might be huge instability in the entire world. People are fighting amongst each other. The countries are at war. USA is bombing Iran. Iran is bombing Israel. Israel is bombing Gaza Strip. All these things are happening. Ukraine and Russia are fighting. So much is going on, right? So what will happen? Global slowdown will happen. Demand for goods and services in the world will reduce. But India, in fact, India's population here, which is more than 145 crore as of now, right? These are approximate estimates. The census will be done in 2026, so we will get more accurate numbers. But as of now, it's safe to say it's around about 145 crore. This population, which many a times is looked on to be so negative, has helped us because this is the population that creates demand in the economy, and that is known as the domestic demand. And because of this domestic demand, Indian economy continues to grow. It is one of the main engine of growth. And next, if you look at among this domestic demand, very strong consumption demand is there, or consumption expenditure is there. So when you are talking about demand, you are basically going to talk about expenditure. Demand happens only when you have the need, but along with the need or desire, you have the ability to purchase. The ability to purchase comes from money. So you will spend money. When you spend money, that means when you are wanting to spend money, that means demand is there. Now this expenditure can also be of two types. One is the consumption expenditure, and the other is going to be the investment expenditure. So in India specifically, this demand is backed by a strong consumption expenditure, specifically in the urban centers, right? So these are very specific things. These are, if there is a direct question with respect to mains in your examination, you have to write points. Of course, there will be generic points, but what are the specific points which were responsible recently? You have to use these kind of points. Just someone may write just simply strong consumption expenditure, but if you mention strong consumption expenditure specifically in urban centers, that's a better point to write. So please pay attention here. Next is the tax rationalization. Now tax rationalization, for example, the tax slabs have been liberalized in the sense that less tax you will be required to pay at a higher slab also. So that is good. The money will be saved. When the money is going to be saved, you may spend somewhere. Where do you spend? Consumption expenditure. That is going to boost the urban consumption. And also tax rationalization is also taking place with respect to GST, wherein the tax rate in GST has been reduced. All right. Now, the economic survey in its preface also talks about the downside risks. So downside risks with respect to Indian economy, ironically, doesn't lie within the Indian economy. In fact, it is because of the rest of the world. And since this world is a globalized world, connected world, as a result of which we also bear the brunt when the other countries don't do well. So very first issue is the geopolitical tension. Now, this is a very nice way to say that the countries are fighting or bombing each other. So this is what geopolitical tension is all about. Then you have the global financial conditions, of course, which is not good. If you are fighting war, if you are at conflict, if you are, spending your money, millions and millions of dollars in arms, ammunition, destroying other nations, your economy is of course not going to do that well because you are spending money on certain other things, and the broader external uncertainties, all these things create uncertainties. Imagine Gulf War going on. So what will happen to the crude oil production? It will of course go down, right? So all these global uncertainties are the downside risks that the economic survey talks about. Then, economic survey has a habit of coming up with one or two concepts every single year, right? For example, the concept of net water exporter. Now here, this year, they have come up with the concept of paradox of 2025. So this could be a very direct question in your prelims asking which of the following best describes the paradox of 2025. So let us see what is this paradox of 2025. So if you talk about economy, the macroeconomic parameters that are there, for example, the GDP growth rate, the inflation statistics, your consumer, your GDP growth rate, your consumer price index, your wholesale price index, your food price index, so on and so forth. These are your macroeconomic indicators. Now, India, with respect to these macroeconomic indicators, is doing exceptionally well. In fact, doing so well that it has not done so well in the combined manner in the last few decades, right? That is what the economic survey also says. However, what is the issue then? What is the paradox? The paradox is, Now that Indian economy is doing exceptionally well on these macroeconomic parameters, the global economy has stopped rewarding these stopped rewarding these macroeconomic parameters. Now the economies are not rewarding this strong macroeconomic parameters, rather it is rewarding certain other things which are not these things, as a result of which creating a paradoxical situation for India who's doing exceptionally well on the traditional parameters which defines the robustness of the economy. But when India started to do so well, the world has started to reward things which are not the macroeconomic parameters. So what are the things that is being rewarded? Now the risks, etc., are being rewarded, whereas the basic fundamentals are not being rewarded. The artificial exaggeration of the demand or the sentiments with respect to imaginative money, that is being rewarded. High risk, high reward, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, all those things are being rewarded, whereas the fundamentals are not being rewarded in a time wherein India is excelling in them. And that is what is the paradox of 2025, right? Now, there are certain other concerns of the global world, which basically is a thing of stress. So what economic survey says is that the world right now is less coordinated. Less coordinated means coordination among the countries are not much. Now, why it is not much? Simply because there is mistrust among the countries. So since there is mistrust among the countries, you will not be ready to coordinate with each other. So there is less of coordination. Now, there is also more risk-averse nature of the economy. Risk-averse means economies are avoiding to take any risk. They are reluctant to take any risk as such. Next, more exposed. The economies now are more exposed to non-linear outcomes. Non-linear outcomes means the outcomes which are less certain. Okay. And there is a narrower margin of safety. Narrower margin of safety means a small mistake, a small geopolitical tension can now bring down the economy as such. So because of these tension, the economic survey says that the best possible scenario for the Indian economy or for the economy of the entire world could be the fact that it simply progresses as it was progressing in 2025. If we can simply manage the economy to do business as it was doing in 2025, we can say that we have done quite well. So this is the kind of situation the world economy is in. I hope that's clear. Now, last few things about the preface of the economic survey. The question is, what economic policy should focus on? So the government should bring on policy with respect to which things is what the economic survey talks about. First is the stability of supply. So the policy should look for stability in the supply chain. Supply chain not domestically but internationally also. If we are, let's say, we import a huge amount of crude oil, for example, so we need to ensure that the supply will be constant and the supply will keep on coming, because geopolitical tensions are there. For example, Venezuela, now the oil fields of Venezuela are being taken over by USA. So again, that may lead to some amount of chaotic situation with respect to crude oil. There would be, let's say, a socio-economic or socio-political instability in countries like, let's say, Iran, Iraq, Qatar, Kuwait, etc., which produce oil. So that can also hamper the supply chain. So we need to ensure stability of the supply chain. Then diversification of routes and payment systems. You cannot keep on having only one single route for your exports. What if that route is having certain conflict going on between two nations? What will you do then? Your exports will take a hit. So you find out diversified or different routes, right? For example, construction of the INSTC, right? And have different payment systems. Different payment currencies, relying too heavily on dollars, and the SWIFT payment system is not going to cut. Next, the domestic growth maximization. Of course, try to maximize the domestic growth because this is the reason for our GDP growth rate. And we need to focus on shock absorption with special emphasis on buffer and liquidity. So we should be prepared for the global meltdown, for the global recession, for the global decline, in order to ensure that we can absorb these kind of shocks and still keep on growing. I hope that's clear. Now, this is what the economic survey preface has talked about. Now, we will move ahead and look at each and every individual chapter. There are total 17, as I have told, 1 to 15, and then 16th chapter divided into 2. So let us get started. Now, one more thing before we move ahead is, now previously the chapters did not have any specific reason of their arrangement. If the arrangement was there, it was with respect to, let's say, sector, first primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. This year it has been specifically mentioned that the arrangement of chapter is in accordance of the national priority. In accordance of the national priority. That means what? That means that if this is the first chapter, whatever is mentioned in that, as far as our nation's priority is concerned, the things mentioned in the first chapter are the most important thing, is what is being said by the economic survey and our chief economic advisor. Now, there is also a hint. What is that hint? For our exam also, it's highly likely that the chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 becomes very important and things related to it are asked directly in our exam. But again, we have to do it completely because UPSC also can be unpredictable and it might ask you things which are there in the last chapter as well. So the idea still remains the same, complete every single thing. All right. So let's get started with the very first chapter, that is state of the economy. Now that has been the first chapter previously also, actually, the state of the economy, wherein the macroeconomic factors, especially the GDP and all, are discussed. So state of the economy, pushing the growth frontier. Pushing the growth frontier means trying to increase the growth rate. So the very first infographic that is given here is with respect to the global policy. Now this global policy is increasingly being shaped by, global policy means what policy does individual country has with other countries. Now, previously, those policies were determined by a lot of economic factors majorly, but now these policies are being shaped by security and geopolitical parameters. Parameters with respect to security, conflict, and what side you are on, which country you support, which country you don't support, which country you have animosity towards. All these factors are now deciding the global policy. And you have the examples in front of you. For example, United States is the biggest example over here. United States implements sanctions on various countries. Now that is not enough. What it also does is it implements secondary sanctions. So for example, Iran is an example over here. So it implemented sanctions on Iran, primary sanctions, meaning that USA said, I will not trade with Iran. But it also implemented secondary sanctions on Iran, saying that if anyone else trades with Iran, I will impose tariff on them. So these kind of things are happening in the world right now. Intensifying geopolitical conflicts are also taking place, right? So as I have told you in the beginning, the bombing or the firing of the missile by one country on another country, destroying each other's infrastructure, etc., that is intensifying. And energy and finance are being used as weapons. How can energy be used as weapons? See, crude oil is also a form of energy. If you are having huge amount of crude oil reserves, you can deny to give it to other countries. So then you can use that energy as a weapon. That is known as weaponization of energy that is taking place. So all these things are happening in the country as we speak about the economic survey. Plus, throughout the world, there is another thing that is happening which is quite common in a lot of economy, is the deterioration of the primary balances. Primary balances means the primary trade balances is what is being talked about. So here you have UK, USA, Italy, Germany, France, Brazil, India, and China. Now, this blue color indicates average over 2015 to 19. This is pre-pandemic period. This is the pandemic period, and this is 2025, the last year. So in a lot of graphs, you would see the economic survey bifurcating between the pre-pandemic era and the post-pandemic era. here they have in fact taken pre-pandemic, the pandemic, and 2025, which is of course post-pandemic. So you can clearly see pre-pandemic it was less. During the pandemic, of course, the trade volume and everything had of course declined, which is clearly visible, but this is an outlier. But even if we consider the very recent one, here also what has happened is the trade balance has gone in the negative. So we have to compare this blue with the yellow, and you can see the yellow line is greater for all the countries except Brazil and India. So Brazil and India has done well as compared to the other important economies of the world when it comes to the primary balance as a percentage of GDP. Right? I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead to the next one. Now this is again very important, rising sovereign yields. Now what are sovereign yields? The government also borrows money from the market. To borrow money from the market, the government issues government securities, including the government bonds known as the sovereign bonds. Now the return that you earn on that bond is known as the yield of that bond. Right? Now what has happened is the yield of that bond has increased. Now if you are a buyer of the bond, you will feel that it's a good thing. If I invest in bond, I'm going to get more return. But for the government, that's not a good thing, in the sense that since the yield on the bond has increased, that means the cost of borrowing has increased for the governments around the world. Right? So cost of borrowing has increased for the countries around the world, which is quite prevalent by this particular line diagram. If you look at USA, this is what USA is. You can see the bond yield increasing. That means the percentage at which their government is borrowing is increasing. Here in April 2021, it was around 1.5%. Now, if you look at it, it is more than 4%. So it is the case with other economies as well, that their cost of borrowing has increased. However, even after all this, one good thing that has remained with India, right, is the fact that India's GDP is seeing a very strong growth momentum, as is clear by this histogram and the line diagram. So the line diagram is the one that is going to give you the percentage increase, whereas the histogram is going to give you the quantum or the number or the amount. So when you're reading the graph, be very clear as to what is representing what. So if you look at the real GDP growth, now real GDP growth, RHS, means for the real GDP growth, you have to read the numbers on the right hand side. For the nominal GDP, you have to read the numbers on the left hand side. I hope that's clear. Now, this real GDP, what is real GDP? The GDP adjusted for inflation is your real GDP. Of course, you can see a dip because of the COVID. This was COVID externality, but you have seen an increase. And even though these things are happening in India, the economic survey says that Indian economy in financial year 26-27 will still grow at around 6.8 to 7.2%. This is the growth rate range that has been predicted by the economic survey. All right. Let's move ahead. Now, as it was mentioned previously, the drivers of the economy was what? The demand. And in that demand means the expenditure that will be done. And the expenditure can be divided into consumption and investment expenditure. Now you can see that both the private consumption and the investment are the drivers of the Indian economy's growth. Let us have a look at that. So we can see that there has been an increase in the consumption expenditure. Yes, of course, this is one small dip. There is small dip over here, but on an average, it has continually kept on increasing the consumption expenditure. Next, if you look at the investment expenditure, that has also seen, it is more undulating, but there is, if you look at it, that here it's 2.85 and then it increases to 3.1. So that's a considerable increase, or sorry, 31.2. This is 28.5 from here to 31.2, and it has sort of stabilized at round about 30. So the investment expenditure is also on quite a high over here. Next, you have the broad-based growth that the economic survey talks about. So what sectors do we have? We have the primary sector, we have the secondary sector, and we have the tertiary sector. In the primary sector, you have, for example, agriculture. In secondary sector means the industrial sector. Then you have the services as the tertiary sector. So if you look at our growth in general, this is the total gross value added. So we are talking about the economy as a whole. So this yellow basically is related to the average over financial year 2016 to 2020. Then you have the blue, that is the financial year 2025. And then you have the green, which is going to be the advanced estimate, means estimate which is made beforehand. So let us see what is it. So for the year 2025, you can see that the economy has maintained the gross value addition, and the future is bright. As we can see, it might lead to 7.3%. If you look at sector specific, so except for agriculture, the projection for industry and services is good. So if you look at agriculture, from 4.5 it increased to 4.6%, that is good, but the projection is slightly low, whereas for industries it had improvement and it is further expected to improve. For the services sector, it saw a slight dip, but it is projected to increase considerably. So again, our service sector is going to be the key driver of the Indian economy. Now, again, another important point that the survey has talked about throughout its chapters is about the reforms. In fact, the last slide is also about the reform. This is not the last slide, of course. There's a lot of time. We have to discuss a lot of chapters. But yes, so there have been hundreds of reforms that the economy has brought in, and a lot of them has been implemented as well. So if you look at the reform which has pushed India's potential GDP to approximately 7%, let us have a look at them. First, it talks about capital accumulation. So India is seeing a huge amount of capital formation, especially because India is focusing a lot on the capital expenditure. So this is one reform which is good. Next is the labor input. What is this labor input? In India is now experiencing greater formalization of the labor force. That means more and more labor are coming into the formal sector. When the labor will come into the formal sector, they will also get the benefits, the perks, the safety, security, social security, safety nets, etc. At the same time, the government will also be able to assess their income, tax, and all these tax nets will also increase. So that is also happening. And the total factor productivity. Now, what is this? The digital public infrastructure and other capital expenditure is leading to the development of infrastructure. Be it digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure. When this infrastructure increases, what does infrastructure do? It helps you to earn more money tomorrow. So capital expenditure is emphasized, digital infrastructure is being improving, as a result of which these reforms are contributing greatly to the economic growth. Right? Yes, online students also, and the people watching us live on YouTube. Guys, if you have any questions, you can ask your questions in the chat as well. All right, surely. Let's move on to the next chapter, that is chapter 2, fiscal developments. So this chapter talks about fiscal development, anchoring stability through consolidation. Right? What is fiscal development? Basically, fiscal development talks about the deficits that the country may have. Now, what is the concept of deficit? See, during a budget, there is some amount of revenue that the government earns. At the same time, there is some amount of expenditure that the government does. So, the revenue minus the expenditure, or you can say the expenditure minus the revenue, however you may want to call it, it depends on the sign. So, let's say you have some amount of expenditure, right? You have 105 as the expenditure, and your revenue was 100. So expenditure is 105, revenue is 100. That means what? You are having a shortfall of 5, and that shortfall of 5 is nothing but the deficit. Right? And there are various types of deficit: budget deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, primary deficit. One of the most important deficit is the fiscal deficit. And that fiscal deficit is actually on a higher side for India, which is not good in the sense that we want to lower it. Now, why it has become higher? Of course, during the COVID, the government did not generate much of the revenue, and rather the government has to spend a lot for social security, social services, welfare schemes, etc. So the expenditure shot up, revenue was not enough. So it led to huge amount of fiscal deficit, which now it is in control, and the government through this chapter wants to showcase that it is now controlling it, and in the future it wants further reduction in this deficit through fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation means increase efficiency in your expenditure so that you have to spend less, plus also increase the efficiency in collection of taxes, getting more revenue, increase the revenue. When you reduce this, increase this, the deficit will reduce. Now, reducing expenditure does not mean spend less. It means spend efficiently so that whatever impact you want to see can be obtained in lesser amount. That is one thing. Secondly, get more revenue. How do you get more revenue? Ensure more compliance of the taxes, for example, tax payments. So that can also help. So this is what this entire chapter deals with. So if you look at this histogram, it talks about the fiscal deficit, which I said is one of the most important deficit that exists in the Indian economy, right? Now, if you look at the fiscal deficit, so as I said that in the COVID period, what had happened? The fiscal deficit has shot up. This is the shooting up of the fiscal deficit. But now look at it, the government has brought it in control. It has brought in within the amount that was there pre-COVID period. So right now we are estimating to have around 4.4% of the fiscal deficit. Remember, this is 4.4% of what? 4.4% of GDP, the gross domestic product. Okay, so this is being brought in under control. Then you have the concept of primary deficit. What is this primary deficit? Now, when you are doing expenditure, this expenditure also includes the repayment of loans. Now, when you repay the loans, you pay a huge amount of interest. So the interest is a burden from the past. So if you want to see exactly what is the present economic situation of the government and the funds that the government has, then you should subtract that interest payment, right? So primary deficit is actually the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments that you make, right? So when you minus the interest payments, which is considerable, in fact, close to 20%, in fact, more than 20% of the government's budget goes only in interest payment. Interest payment is the highest percentage of expenditure of the government. The joint highest percentage of expenditure of the government goes for interest payment. If you subtract that, primary deficit you get. And you can see the primary deficit is quite low. It's just 0.8% of the total GDP, right? Next, another thing that the government is looking at is sustained revenue buoyancy. What is revenue buoyancy? See, when you talk about buoyancy, it is related to GDP. And since you are saying revenue, let us see what it means. Revenue buoyancy. Revenue buoyancy means with increase in GDP, the revenue will increase in a proportionate manner, more than proportionately. That means if there is an increase in GDP by 10%, the revenue may end up increasing by 7, 8, 9%. So with 10% GDP increase, revenue should increase, let's say, by 5%. That is the proportion of increase that should happen, but it increases by a higher amount. So that will showcase that the revenue is buoyant in nature. So whenever there is an increase, there is a higher increase, higher than proportionate increase in the revenue with increase in GDP, there is revenue buoyancy. So India is having that. Plus, India's direct tax base is broadening. Broadening means more and more people are paying the direct taxes now. At the same time, the percentage of direct tax in the total tax collection is now increasing, which is given by this pie chart. So this is your pre-pandemic average. So before the pandemic era, on an average, 41% of 48% 48%. 48% of taxes were collected through the indirect taxes, were collected as the indirect taxes, and 52% were collected as the direct taxes. That means huge percentage, almost half of the taxes were indirect. But what has happened now? Now the indirect taxes are just 41 and the direct taxes have increased to 59%. Now that is a good thing. Why it is a good thing? Because direct taxes are progressive in nature, whereas indirect taxes are regressive in nature. What does progressive means? Progressive taxes put a heavier burden on the people who earn more. So heavy burden on people earning more, less burden on people earning less, which is correct. Whereas the indirect taxes, they are regressive in nature, means they put heavier burden on the people earning less and lesser burden on the people earning more. And that regressive nature of indirect tax, that percentage collection of indirect tax, is now having a lower percentage in the total tax collection, which is again a really good thing for the economy and for the people of India, right? Then these are few things that is mentioned in the economic survey, all of which have seen a growth. So you have the pre-pandemic average and the post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic 2016 to 20, post-pandemic 2022 to 2025. If you have a look at this, every good thing has basically increased. The revenue receipt has increased. The gross tax revenue has increased. The non-corporate tax collected has increased. The income tax return filed has also increased. That means what? The tax base, the direct tax base has increased. So pre-pandemic 6.9 crore people were filing for taxes. Now there are 9.2 crore people filing for taxes. So that's a huge increase in the direct tax base that we are talking about. All right, let's move ahead. This is about the gross GST collection. So GST is also doing quite well. If you look at the gross GST collection, it has increased only. You can see it from 2023, 24, 25, and the estimation for 26 is also on the higher side. Whereas if you look at the year-on-year growth, that has gone down. The growth is still there, but the percentage at which it is growing has gone down. So the year-on-year growth from 23 to 24 was around, here it will be on the RHS, so it was around 12% growth. Then it reduced to around 9%. Now it is somewhere close to around 5.7, 5.8 or 6%. So the year-on-year growth has declined, but there is still continuous growth in the GST collection. Next, the economic survey also mentions about the GST 2.0 reform that was brought in by the government with effect from September 2025. So it is already in place. What has happened with respect to the GST 2.0 reform is that there are now two major GST tax slab. One is 5%, the other is 18%. The 12% tax slab under GST has been done away with. However, what other thing that has happened is the 28% tax slab on the luxury and the sin goods have been increased to 40% of tax. So there they have increased it, but 12% tax slab they have removed. The 12% tax slab things have been brought under now 5% of taxes. In fact, some of the 28% taxes have gone down into 18%. An example is your LED TV. So now in LED TVs, up to certain sizes, you will still have only 18% of tax on that. Only the very big size LED TV will have the demerit good taxation rate. So a lot of things have been reduced in the taxation, and we have a two-rate structure. So do not get confused in your prelims exam. If it says that the GST has a two-rate structure, yes, that is correct. Why it is correct? Majority of the goods and services are coming within the two tax rate structure, 18% and 5%. Only certain demerit and sin goods come under 40, and there are certain things which are not taxed at all. For example, the life-saving drugs. A lot of life-saving drugs have been made zero taxable. Right? So now what is this going to do? This is going to boost the consumption. When the taxes are down, the things will be cheaper, so you would want to consume more. When you consume more, it boosts the consumption. When more consumption is there, that means demand is high, so it will boost the production and the manufacturing sector also, which will lead to more employment. More employment basically would mean again more money in the hands of the people, and subsequently it will lead to more demand. Next is the center's effective capex to GDP, which has scaled. Capex means capital expenditure. So this graph basically shows a continuous increase in the capital expenditure as a percentage of GDP. So the country was spending around 2.6% of GDP as capital expenditure. Now that has increased to 4.3%, which is a good thing, because when you do capital expenditure, it creates assets for you, which is basically going to help you generate more revenue in the future. Then you have center's SASCI, which was successfully incentivized. Now what is this SASCI? Basically, this is the assistance that the central government gives to the state government for capital expenditure. So what does the central government do? The central government says that it will provide additional assistance to the states, provided that assistance is used for capital expenditure. Now, because of this kind of scheme of the central government, it has ensured that the state government also do higher amount of capital expenditure, which is clear from this graph. So the state's capital outlay is this. So you can see it is close to 2.4%. If this scheme would not have been implemented, then what the situation would have been is described by this dotted line, state's capital outlay, which excludes the special assistance from the central government. In that case, the percentage would have been simply 1.9. So this particular assistance by the central government to the state government has actually helped the state government to spend more on the capital expenditure. All right, so let's move on to the third chapter. Now, the first few chapters are actually quite big, so don't worry. The later on chapters, in fact, few of the chapters are quite small, so don't worry. Let's complete this as a marathon. Chapter 3, it talks about monetary management and financial intermediation. Monetary management means managing the supply of the money in the market, in the economy, and financial intermediation. So financial intermediation, which are financial intermediaries? Your banks, your financial institutions. So this chapter deals with it. Now, one very important thing that this chapter talks about, the effective transmission of the monetary policy. Now, what is monetary policy? Monetary policy is brought out by the Monetary Policy Committee, in which they define the policy rates. What are policy rates? For example, your repo rate is a policy rate. So what is this repo rate? Repo rate is basically the rate at which, it's the rate at which the RBI gives short-term loans. It's going to give the short-term loans to whom? To the scheduled commercial banks against approved security, against the approved security. So it's the rate at which RBI gives short-term loans to the scheduled commercial banks. Now, what has RBI done? In the last few quarters, RBI has successively lowered the repo rate. That means RBI is now charging less and less and less repo rate to the scheduled commercial banks when it is giving loans to them. Because of which, the scheduled commercial banks should in turn charge us less interest rate. Fair enough, correct? But previously it was seen that the RBI used to lower the repo rate, but the scheduled commercial banks used to still keep on charging us more. But this graph shows us that that is not the case anymore. Now what is happening is, if the RBI is lowering the repo rate, the scheduled commercial banks are passing on the benefit to its customers, which is seen by this graph. So this graph consists of different policy rates. Marginal standing facility, this is also an interest rate. This is an interest rate for borrowing money from the RBI overnight. This is standing deposit rate, again an interest rate. This is the repo rate, again an interest rate, which I talked about. So RBI, as you can see, it has consistently lowered the marginal standing facility rate, the standing deposit facility rate, and the repo rate has also been lowered, as you can clearly see over here. So what are we trying to show by this graph? The most important thing here is this gray line, the weighted average call rate, which talks about all these rates are going down, but are these rates being also lowered by the banks? So the weighted average call rate shows us that picture. If this line also goes down, that means yes, the banks are transferring the benefits to the customers. And as you can see, this gray line also, of course it's fluctuating, but it is continually going down. From this level, it has reached to this level. So you can see that there is a decline in this particular rate as well. This is what is happening. The banks are transferring the benefits to the customers, which is a good thing. Now next we are talking about the non-performing assets. Non-performing assets. Now what are non-performing assets? First of all, what is an asset? And remember, we are talking in terms of banks, specifically the scheduled commercial banks. What are scheduled commercial banks? See, commercial bank is a bank which works for profit motive. That is why we call it as a commercial bank. Now, why we call some of the banks as scheduled commercial banks? Because they are mentioned in the schedule of the RBI Act of 1934. To be specific, they are mentioned in the second schedule of the RBI Act of 1934. Now, why are they mentioned in the schedule of the RBI Act of 1934? Because they are bank of high significance. They have high market capitalization. There are other banks which are non-scheduled commercial banks. They are small in nature, so it is not that significant. So they are not mentioned in the schedule. These are significant banks. That is why they are mentioned in the schedule of the RBI Act of 1934. Now, with respect to banks, when the bank gives loan to you, so the loan for you is a liability because you have to pay it back. But what about the bank? For the bank, the loan is not a liability. In fact, for the bank, the loan is an asset. The loan is basically an asset. Now, this asset is the one which performs for the bank. You pay back the EMI, so it performs, the revenue comes, the bank make profit. But if you stop paying the EMI, what will happen? That asset will get converted from performing asset to non-performing asset. That is means NPA. And India has been facing a serious issue with respect to NPA. In fact, these issues majorly came to light in 2014-15 also. Since then, we are trying to battle it. Now, this economic survey and this graph shows that these NPAs in Indian banking system is declining, specifically the scheduled commercial bank. So if you can see, this is the gross the gross non-performing asset, and this is the net non-performing asset. So if you look at the gross non-performing asset, there was, as I said, huge increase. Around 15 it got increased, and from around 4% it increased to 11.2% of the gross advances. Advances means the amount of loan that the bank is giving. So the amount of loan that the bank is giving, 11.2 were becoming non-performing. However, that has now declined and it is only 2.2, whereas the net also increased up to 6, but now it has declined to simply 0.5% of the net, or let's say 0.5% of the gross advances that are being given. So this is a really good or healthy sign for the Indian banking system. Now next, what else has happened with respect to availability of money in the market or in the hands of the people is that there has been an expansion in the pension coverage. Now yes, the government, the state governments, even the central government in various fields have stopped the pension scheme that was as such there. But the government stopped the pension. But the government has come up with a lot of pension schemes, right? You have Atal Pension Yojana, you had the old pension scheme, now you have the new pension scheme, you have the unified pension scheme. Now, considering all of that, what has happened is the ambit of the pension has increased. The people who are subscribed to the pension system has increased, which is visible by this infographic. So if you look at people enrolled in APY, what is this? Atal Pension Yojana. Under Atal Pension Yojana, there were around 24.6 lakh subscribers in 2016. Now there are 641.3 lakh subscribers in 2025. Now let me tell you one more thing. Of course, this number is going to be less because the Atal Pension Yojana was introduced in 2015-2016. So it was a very new scheme. It is not that this scheme was going on since 10 years and still there were 24 lakh people. So sometimes certain things can be, certain thing needs to be brought into context. If the scheme started then of course it is bound to have lesser people and more awareness will be created and more people will be enrolled. But still the number is quite good over here. So from around 25 lakh, it has increased to over 6 crore people. If you look at the NPS, now that is the new pension scheme. So here if you look Atal Pension Yojana, this has increased by around 20 times. Why? Because the scheme was new here and now here it has become more prominent. But if you look at new pension scheme, now this is where more emphasis should be given because the pension scheme is going on since a long time. As a result of which this is a considerable increase from 97.5 lakh subscribers to more than double the subscribers, which is a really good number. But again remember, this has happened over a 9-year period. So if 9-year period, if you look at it, this will come down to around 6% of year-on-year growth, which is good enough. So many a times also economic survey tries to show you magnanimous increase, but if you break it down, you will realize it's 6% growth rate, but still, which is still good enough. All right, let us move ahead. Next is the total amount of life and non-life premium, which is also rising. Now, India has a target of increasing its insurance net and having more and more people under the insurance, life insurance specifically, and then non-life insurance as well. This histogram showcases exactly that in India, the life insurance is increasing and the non-life insurance is also increasing. How can we say that? Because the premium is increasing. So if you look at in 2021 for the life insurance 6.3 lakh crore premium and here 2 lakh crore, whereas in 2025 you have 8.9 lakh crore for the life insurance. There is a considerable increase and there is some amount of increase here as well. So more and more people are getting insured as well. Next is the development in the capital market in financial year 2026. Now, financial 25-26. Now, here the data is up to April to November 25 only. The data is available. So, the last 3 months or last 4 months are not available. That is why this data, you might see that it is lower, but please understand that this is only up to April, November, 4 months are excluded. Okay? So, if you look at this, if you look at the investment that is happening or the resource mobilization in debt and equity, you can see that there is a considerable increase. And after the completion of the entire fiscal year, this will definitely be, not definitely, but certainly to a very high extent, we can say that it's highly likely to be more than 218.3. This is what? This is the number of IPOs. IPOs means initial public offering, correct? Now, what is initial public offering? Now, whenever the company gets listed for the very first time on the stock exchange, along with it comes the initial public offering through which the company offers shares to the people, right? That is what IPO is. So, more number of IPOs means more and more number of companies got listed. That means what? It is good. Why it is good? Because you have to be of a certain size, certain market capitalization and certain strong fundamentals to get listed on the stock exchange. So if you are getting listed on the stock exchange, that's a really positive thing for the company. That means more and more positivity in the startup sector, you can say, or the new companies, for example. So this number of IPOs have also increased. Of course, this is just 260, but this is for just 8 months, right? So you can add another 130 over here or at least 100 over here. So this is going to be easily more than 320, might as well go beyond 350. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead to the 4th chapter. The 4th chapter is on the external sector. The external sector, playing the long game. Now the title of the chapter itself gives us a lot. When it comes to, whenever it was talking about the domestic sector, we are quite confident, we are doing well, the numbers are there to showcase the positivity in the future, projection is there. But the moment we're talking about the external sector, in the external sector, we have to be dependent on the rest of the countries of the world. So here, the situation is tougher. But still, the economic survey says to not be pessimistic. Just ensure that we manage this situation in the best of our abilities. As a result of which, we are going to play a long game over here. That means it is going to take some amount of time for us to start doing well here also, because of the external factors that are involved. So if you look at the trends in the trade growth, goods and services together, remember we do exceptionally well in services, specifically with respect to the balance of payment. So if you look at the growth in the trade, now this is the data from 24 to 26. So this is the advanced estimates of imports and advanced estimates of exports. So you can see the imports have been higher, exports have been lower, right? But again, the exports are trying to be matching with the imports, and the imports would go down, the exports would slightly be higher, which is a good thing. We have to further wait and ensure that these exports further grow over here. However, please remember, imports as such are not completely bad. In fact, the economic survey itself in the coming chapters is going to say that imports itself is not bad. Why it is bad? See, for example, why it is not bad. For example, USA imports a lot from India. USA has a trade deficit with India. Now, does that mean USA is in a terrible condition? No. The people's per capita income is increasing. When people's per capita income is increasing, of course, people would want to spend more. People would want to buy luxurious products. People would want to buy imported goods also. So it's not all bad as such, right? So if import also increase, that's not a problem, but we will also ensure that we keep on increasing our exports so that we can keep on earning the foreign exchange. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead. Sorry. Yes. Next is the services trade. Now this services trade, it continues to be a key driver of India's trade journey. As I said, with respect to goods and services, it's the service sector in which we have a stronger or a better capability. So if you look at this, the compound annual growth rate. So this yellow tells us about the total exports, blue denotes the merchandise exports, and green denotes the service exports. So you can clearly see that the service exports are the one which is driving. The service exports compounded annual growth rate close to 14%, right? Whereas merchandise export is around about 10, as a result of which overall growth is around 11.7%, which is held by the service sector. So this is for this period. Then if you look at from 10 to 25, again, it's the service sector that is driving. Here also the service sector that is driving. Here also the service sector that is driving our growth rate. Okay? Same is the case if you look at here, service sector exports. So if you talk about service sector export, 6.5% of year-on-year growth of the service sector import. Whereas if you look at the service sector export, the export is growing and the export is so high. Whereas if you look at the import is of the services is so less. From 150 it's going to increase to 152.2. The increase is quite less, and the export, the percentage growth rate is also high, plus the quantity is also very much superior over here. So we are doing around $285.5 billion worth of exports of services and importing only $150 billion of services, as a result of which we are having a surplus of $135.5 billion. If you look at the estimates of April to December, this surplus has increased from $135.5 billion to $151.7 billion. All right. Let's move ahead. Yes, this is important. India's strategic, everything in fact is important here. There is India's strategic push to expand the trade partnership. So here we see the 8 free trade agreements that India is having or is about to get implemented, and here are the free trade agreements that are under negotiation. In fact, since I said that this economic survey has the latest data up to 23rd of January 2026, and we all know that yesterday the India-European Union trade deal has also been finalized. So this, which you can see somewhere here with respect to India-Eurasian or European Union Economic free trade agreement. This has also now been finalized. In addition to this, there are other countries and organizations with which India is in negotiation with respect to free trade agreement, which is a good thing because the situation like USA imposing huge amount of tariffs, so we need to find out other market where we can export our goods. And of course, when we find other markets wherein we can export our goods, of course, the other countries would also want to, export their goods into our country. So that is also going to happen. Okay. Moving ahead, if we talk about the current account deficit, now current account deficit, as I have said, has generally been in negative. That means the current account balance have been in deficit, except for 1 year, as I had mentioned. However, the economic survey says that even though there is a deficit, this deficit is a very comfortable deficit. That means it's all right to have this much of deficit. Why? Also because we have huge amount of foreign exchange reserves with RBI. There is about $701 billion of foreign exchange reserve with the RBI. So a small amount of current account deficit is not going to make much of a difference. It is quite comfortable for us. Now, that current account balance can be seen with this dotted line. The moment you see that this current account balance is negative, then it is called as current account deficit. So the current account deficit, if you track it from 2015 to 2026, it has been, this is 0, here it is negative, here it is positive. So it has been negative only. Only once it went to positive, and again it went to negative only. So in UPSC, you can be directly asked a question that the current account balance has been in deficit in the last 10 years. No, in one of the year, it actually became positive also. So this trend you should know. Exact numbers as such not needed, but the trend is definitely needed. Next, India is leading in the greenfield digital investment. Greenfield project means starting the project from scratch. Brownfield means project already is there, you modify, you improve, you modify it, elaborate it, that is brownfield. But greenfield means starting something from scratch. So those digital investments which are being invested in the greenfield projects, India is the leading major economy. You have the top economics by project announcement. So Brazil, for example, have announced 23. If you look at India, we have announced around 114. It is considerably high. Okay, so we are in fact having the highest number. Next is the strong external buffers and anchor stability. So as I mentioned, the economic survey is saying that some amount of current deficit is okay. Why? Because we have huge amount of foreign exchange reserve. As I said, over $701 billion. And see, the economic survey got published or presented today, and it has the data up to 16. In fact, one of the data that has been taken is up to 23rd of January. So very recent data is provided to us in the economic survey. So as of 16th January 2026, we have a foreign exchange reserve of $701.4 billion, which has basically doubled in the last 10 years. Now, this foreign exchange is enough to cover imports of around 11 months. That means for 11 months, if we earn no foreign exchange, we can still keep on importing for the next 11 months, which is a good number. The global standard is 6 months, but India has foreign exchange enough for 11 months. Right? I hope that's clear. Now, next is chapter 5, inflation. Now, in previous economic survey, chapter 4 was inflation, but again, there was no much reasoning for the numbering. Here, the numbering is having a reason. As I've mentioned previously, it is talking about the things that are more important are taken up first. Okay, so this year, it's chapter number 5, inflation. Now, inflation is actually under control now. Previous survey gave all the reasoning as to why inflation is high and also told us that in the coming year, the inflation is going to go down. And what has happened? Inflation has actually gone down. So the economic survey was very right to say what it said in the previous economic survey, right? And this year also, of course, it will be right. But in economy, you just don't know what happens. So inflation has been tamed and anchored. So it has been tamed. From the high inflation, it has now been reduced. So India has recorded the lowest inflation rate since the beginning of the CPI. What is CPI? consumer price index, right? So it has recorded the lowest. If you look at it, you have the headline inflation, core inflation, and food inflation. Now what is the relationship between them? Now headline inflation basically includes everything, which includes food, energy, everything. Now from this headline inflation, if you subtract food and energy, you basically get core inflation. I hope that's clear. So why would you want to calculate core inflation by excluding food and energy when food and energy are so important? Because food and energy are the things whose prices keep on fluctuating a lot. So there is high fluctuation in them. So if you want to understand what is happening with respect to the other goods and services, you consider the core inflation. In headline inflation, food and energy are included. So let us see what has happened with headline inflation. It has gone down 1.3%. So from 5% to 1.3%. What has happened to food inflation? Now food inflation was the reason why inflation was high. Now that food inflation has gone down. Food inflation is hovering at minus 2.71%. That means there is deflation with respect to food, not disinflation. Disinflation is the reduction in the rate of inflation. Deflation is what? Negative inflation rate. So the food prices are in deflation in fact. I hope that's clear. Now, in fact, these food prices were such a big issue for inflation that UPSC asked the mains question as to what are the persistent reasons for persistent food inflation and how effective is monetary policy committee in order to address these kind of inflation. That was a question that was asked in mains, right? And if you look at the core inflation has sort of stagnated or has remained more or less the same, or you can see a slight increase which is there. So overall the inflation as such is under control. If you talk about the ability to reduce inflation, India has done exceptionally well. In fact, India has seen the highest reduction in headline inflation. So we have seen close to 1.8% reduction in our headline inflation, highest. The other countries have seen lesser and lesser. In fact, in some countries, the inflation has increased. Of course, because they were already at a very low rate of inflation. So that is why inflation there has increased. We were at a higher level. For us, it has gone down. Next is, as I mentioned, decline in the food inflation. So this decline, now previously the increase in food inflation was because of vegetables and pulses. But of course, vegetables, specifically in vegetables, tomato and onion, for example, as a result of which now decline in the inflation is also because of the same commodities, because they have now increase in production. So prices have come down. So if you look at vegetable, the vegetable rates have declined and the pulses rate have also declined. Both are in deflation, as a result of which reducing the food inflation in totality, right? If you look at the core inflation, it is quite steady. Steady as in it's not it is not declining, of course. As we can see, it's close to 4, less than 4. It is around 4.6. So it's not declining, but at the same time, it's not increasing also considerably. That is why we are saying that it is having a steady pace. And remember, RBI targets an inflation rate of 4 plus minus 2% of headline inflation. That means from 2 to 6% it is acceptable, right? So we are in fact on a very sweet spot over here. Now the reasons also is mentioned by the economic survey. So if in questions or in mains you are asked the reasons, of course you can write various other reasons which also would be there, but the economic survey lists it down for us. So it is important for us to mention these reasons, and if you can follow the same sequence in your answer, there can be nothing better than that. So first is moderation in inflation in the global prices of key metals. Now we are not talking about metals here, gold and silver. We are talking about other metals over here. Gold and silver, as we know, has increased in price. Below normal temperature, so extremity of weather has reduced. El Nino effect has resided, La Nina has come in, the temperatures have gone down, the rainfall will be high, so climate reasons. Then improved stock position of food grains. That means our Food Corporation of India and the government has ensured that the good amount of the good amount of stockpiling is there of the food grains, which can help control the inflation. Then you have the pass-through of GST rates rationalization. What is this? As we have seen, GST rate 12% has been removed. It has decreased to 5%. Lot of 28% things have come down to 18%. This has also been removed. So the GST rates have come down in general, as a result of which things will be cheaper. Right? So these are your reasons. Next is chapter 6, agriculture and food management. Now here, along with economic survey, the another document is released, which is nothing but the infographic document. In that infographic document, this chapter 6 has just one page of infographic. All right. But remember, we will also come up with detailed chapter-wise lectures or sessions for the economic survey. So stay tuned for that. Let us now continue with chapter 6, agriculture and food management. So here we are talking about raising the productivity to ensure income for the farmers and food security for the people at large. So if you look at the average gross value added through agriculture, it is the fisheries which is now in agriculture. Why is fishery coming? Because agriculture, when you talk about agricultural gross value added, you take agriculture plus allied activities, and that allied activities consist of livestock rearing, consist of fishing and aquaculture as well. So it's the fishing and aquaculture which is growing at a faster pace. Then you have the livestock. So basically it is the allied activities that is helping agricultural growth considerably. Then you have the crops, which are only at 4%, but because of these two, the average gross value added is 4.7%, which is good. See, agriculture practically will be on the lower side because the land as such of agriculture is not expanding that much. It is limited also. And we are not going for GM crops, genetically modified crops. We have only one GM crop for commercial growing and selling, that is BT cotton. In addition to that, there is no. So we are not taking those kind of routes. And the land is limited, as a result of which the growth anyhow in agriculture would be less on the lesser side only, and around 4 to 5% of agricultural growth rate is considered to be actually a very good growth rate. Then let's move on to chapter 7, that is the services sector, from stability to new frontier. Now that our services sector growth rate has been stabilized, we now want to grow further. So if you look at the nature of our service sector, it is considered to be resilient and steady. Resilient means even if there is economic let's say global slowdown, economic recession or economic slowdown as such, our services sector has still remained robust. So deviation from pre-COVID levels, if you look at, and this is pre-COVID actual growth rate, and this is for 2024. So how much is the deviation? Let me explain this graph completely. Pre-COVID actual growth rate for China was 8%. In 2024, it is growing by 5%. So what is the deviation? The deviation is approximately of 3.1% deviation. That means the gap between this and this is about 3%. If you look at USA, pre-COVID growth was 1.3%. Presently what it is? 0. So what is the deviation? 1.3%. So for everyone there is a huge amount of deviation. But let us see what happens in case of India. Growth rate for India pre-COVID was 7.6. Now it's not that bad. It is still 7.2. So the deviation for India is very small. In fact, it is on such a huge number, but still the deviation is very small for India. This shows the resilient nature of India's services sector. Now, this services sector continues to be the major driver of the growth of Indian GDP. How that is seen, we can see it here. Pre-COVID average, if you talk about 51.3% contribution to the GDP. Now we can see that it is contributing close to 54% of the GDP. Its contribution in the total GDP is increasing. That means its share is increasing. Also, the service sector is now employing about 30% of the workforce is now employed by the services sector. Okay. Now, this growth in the services sector. Now, in services sector, what things come? your software industry, IT, BPO, all these sectors are services sector. You have your tourism sector, hospitality, entertainment, all these are service sector. So for India, those are also important. But in addition to that, the major factor for our service growth is basically the software services and the professional management and counseling services. Again, software and the related services that are there, they have seen a considerable growth, as you can see over here. In fact, in addition to this, other services, other things in the services sector are also growing in India. Even tourism pre-COVID was on the peak, but during COVID, of course, it saw a downfall. After that, it was still trying to recover to the pre-COVID level. Now we are reaching the pre-COVID level of tourism. So the service sector is doing quite well, specifically led by the software services and professional and management consulting. Next, you have chapter 8, that is industry's next leap, that we are talking about structural transformation and global integration. So here in the industry, see, industry for India you can say Indian industries have been underdeveloped as such, right? Because initially, after we won independence, our focus was agriculture. By the time second 5-year plan, we did focus on heavy industries, but we could not sustain that focus because it required huge amount of investment. So we shifted back to agricultural focus, and then by the time we should focus again on the industries, services sector started coming into picture. The services sector that we know of right now, the ICT revolution. So again, we started focusing on the services sector, and our services sector has developed considerably, and the industrial sector remain undeveloped. But now we are focusing on developing our industrial sector also. So if you look at it, there is optimism with respect to the prospects of our industry. So this is business expectation index. Let me explain this. This is business expectation index. If the business expectation index is more than 100, the expectation is considered to be optimistic. If it is less than 100, the expectation is considered to be pessimistic. So if you look at it, our business expectation index has been optimistic because this is the 100 index, 100 unit line. So we have been above 100, 110 here, and here also we grew, and we are again stable at around 110, which is more than 100. So the prospect of our industrial sector is actually optimistic. Okay, so that's a good thing. Then if you look at the production that is happening in the industry of important goods, for example cement, for example steel, all that thing is on the rise. This is the installed capacity of cement. Installed capacity means if it functions at full capacity, what will be the output? That is the installed capacity that has kept on increasing. And then this is the actual cement production. See, in the installed capacity might be 1 million metric ton for certain companies, but it may work at 70% efficiency. So only 0.7 million metric ton may be the output. So there will always be a gap, but even the production, as you can see, is increasing. If you look at the finished steel, so here also this is production, this is consumption. So if you look at, production has been lower than the consumption at times. You can see consumption is high, production is low. So where did the demand gets met? It gets met by import. So India has to import. Okay? All right. But even then the production is clearly increasing in India. Now, of course, we need to increase it more so that we don't have to import. But the idea is that the production has also kept on increasing with the increase in consumption. Then similar is the case with the coal, rising domestic production and lower imports. So you can see the domestic production is light gray. So domestic production has increased, whereas this is consumption. So this is consumption has also increased, but the import has not consistently increased. In fact, there has been ups and downs over here, right? Why that is possible? Because the production is also increasing. If you would have not increased the production, the imports would have increased even further. Now, this is the growing export of the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry has seen a continuous increase, just a slight decline in this particular year, but after that there has been a consistent increase in the pharmaceutical exports also. Then you have the production, sales and exports of the automobiles. So if you look at the total production of the automobiles, there has been a decline, of course, because again, this is a COVID year. Please pay attention that this is a COVID year, right? So of course, it was bound to go down, but after that, there has been an increase. If you talk about domestic sales, of course, during COVID, it went down and there will be a further decline because people will eat up their savings to spend because they are losing their jobs. But after that, again, the domestic sales have increased. If you look at the electronic vehicle registration is increasing year by year. Compound annual growth rate is of 62.5%. So it's a considerable increase in the number of electronic vehicles that is getting registered. Then if you look at electronic production and exports, so this is the production. Electronic production has consistently increased. The import has also consistently increased. So imports increase means, of course, we are spending, but always remember, since the per capita income of the people is increasing, so people will buy more, let's say Apple products, laptops, mobiles, etc. So it is at times all right for it to increase, but what we should focus is ensure that our exports also keep on increasing. So is that happening? Yes, even that is happening. Now, with the Apple manufacturing plants getting established in India, that is going to help. If you are having electronic industries or companies establish its plants in India only, that can also help us to lower our imports. Then if you look at the mobile manufacturing, so this is reflecting over here. Since Apple, iPhone, etc. manufacturing plants are now being established in India, what is happening? The production or the manufacturing of mobile in India is increasing. So it has considerably increased. Of course, they have taken 10-year data, but still the increase is quite high over here. Sure. Let's move ahead. The next one, India's ranking in the Global Innovation Index. See, this Global Innovation Index is determined with respect to factors like how many patents were filed, how many patents were approved, so on and so forth. And India has done considerably well in that. In 2015, our rank was 81, which now has increased to 38. Next, chapter 9, it talks about investment and infrastructure, and it talks about strengthening our connectivity capacity, railways, roadways, airways, increasing that, and the competitiveness. Competitiveness means having higher efficiency in transportation, be it transportation of the human beings or be it transportation of the freight or the goods that are transported. So here it's the effective capex. Capex means capital expenditure. So you can see that capital expenditure has successively increased since 2015. In fact, is there any dip? There is no dip at all. This is increase. There has been no dip at all. Even during the COVID period, there is no dip. Why? Because even at that time, the government was the one who was spending in capital expenditure. So this is a very important thing to remember, because other things you are saying that during COVID it has gone down, but it has not gone down even during COVID period. Then you have increase in the project approvals by public-private partnership, PPP projects, in which the money majorly is provided by the private sector, who undertakes the construction of the projects, completes the project construction, and earns the revenue by operating that project for 25, 30, 35 years. That is the concept of PPP project. So the number of projects that have been approved has considerably now increased under PPP, as a result of which the value of the project has also increased. Then these are factual things. There have been physical infrastructure which has increased, leading to increased connectivity. So here you have the total national highway network. So there has been a 60% increase in the last around 12 years. Operational high-speed corridors have increased by 10 times in the last 12 years. Then there has been average commissioning of railway network per year. So in 2004 to 2014, this decade, average commissioning per year was around 1500 kilometers, 1499. Now we are commissioning around 3118 kilometers per year. So it has more than doubled. Then we have the port infrastructure expansion. So we have here the total cargo handled at major and non-major ports. and here you have the total port capacity. So this has also increased. The cargo that is being handled has increased, the total installed capacity has increased. Now this is a very interesting thing. The turnaround time for the container vessel, the ships, right? So a huge amount of volume of our goods gets exported through the ships, gets imported through the ships, gets exported through the ships, through the sea route. Now in that there is a concept of turnaround time. Turnaround time means if this is the port, when the ship comes, the ship will come, the goods get unloaded, whatever we have to export, we will load that and the ship will go back. So the time taken for the ship to anchor at the port and then unload and then reload and then turn back is known as the turnaround time. The lower the turnaround time, the higher will be the efficiency of the port operation. So we have managed to lower our turnaround time from 43 hours to 30 hours. However, still remember that this 30 hours is also quite more. This is equal to 1.25 days. In other countries, it is being done within hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, less than half the time. So we have to further improve, but there has been an improve. Now this is the cargo movement through inland waterways. What are inland waterways? Waterways that are being made on the river. We have a great river system, so we are utilizing that also, and there is an increase in the cargo that is being traveling through the inland waterways. Then you have the 10th chapter, that is environment and climate change, building a resilient, competitive and development driven India. Now of course we are focusing on what? We are focusing on the increase in our renewable energy. And in fact, we are doing really great with respect to increasing our capacity with respect to renewable energy. But the economic survey talks about certain concerns. What are these concerns? It says that in our renewable energy, for example, solar energy is renewable energy, wind energy is renewable energy. So when we talk about creating energy as solar energy or wind energy, there is a huge challenge. And what is that challenge? That challenge is the requirement of certain metals. So what metals are required? So to produce solar, 1 gigawatt of solar power, you require, you remember silver rates have gone up, gold rates have also gone up. These are metals which are used for investment, but silver is also used in industries, especially the artificial intelligence industries, plus also the renewable energy industry. So for producing 1 gigawatt of solar energy, you need how much? 18.5 tons of silver, which is a huge cost. And forget the cost, the extraction of silver itself is a thing, because silver is extracted or comes from the ore, which is a combined ore for zinc. So when you extract zinc along with zinc ore, you get silver ore also, from which you get silver. So all this is a huge process which is becoming a bottleneck, and you need 18.5 tons of silver, which is of course also very costly. And you know that the silver prices are skyrocketing now. 1 kg of silver has gone to beyond 4 lakh rupees. However, they are vulnerable, they fluctuate a lot, but yes, this is what we need. We need polysilicon, 2 to 3,000 tons, aluminium, 10,252 kgs of aluminium, etc. is required. Energy requirement is also there. Same is the case for wind power. For wind power, different metals are required, copper 2.2866, so on and so forth, as a result of which there is a huge bottleneck for our renewable energy sector. As a result of which, we are also turning our attention towards nuclear energy. So the government has come up with the Shanti Act in December 2025, which allows the private and the state participation in nuclear energy production, right? Of course, there can be certain safety, security concerns. Yes, definitely. But the government is shifting its attention towards nuclear energy considerably, so considerably that it has allocated 20,000 crore rupees under the budget 25-26. And this year also we can expect that huge amount of budget would be allocated for it again. Let's move on to the next chapter, that is chapter 11, education and health, what works and what is going to be next. So as far as education is concerned, India wants universal access to education. So if you look at the school education, right, 10, 12 standard, we want 100% access to education. That means 100% of the people of 100% of Indian citizens should be having at least that minimum education. That is our target. For higher education in universities, our target is 50% should be enrolled. Both targets we want to achieve by 2030, and we are doing considerably well over here in terms of enrollment. So up to in 1 to 5th standard, 90% enrollment is there. 6th standard to 8th standard, again 90.3. 9th and 10th, 78.7. 11th and 12th, 58.4. So some work needs to be done. The higher up you move, the lesser percentage enrollment is there, which we need to work upon. And here our target is to have 50% of the population enrolled for higher education as well. Next is the strengthening of our healthcare system. So there has been certain good things. There has been 37% decline in the infant mortality rate, and the life expectancy of Indians have increased to 70.3 years. That means an average Indian is living for more than 70 years. The calorie intake of per capita calorie intake of Indians have also increased. Now, does that mean that it is because of sedentary lifestyle? That is also possible. But it is also said that a lot of poor people are also now able to get those calories because the poverty is reducing. Hence, you can see increase in the calories and also increase in the intake of protein. Then you have the 12th chapter, that is employment and skill development. Here, economic survey talks about getting the skilling right. Very important. It's a very good thing to say, because now the time is gone wherein we would train people only for manual labor and stuff. No, you have to now train people in artificial intelligence, also in digital literacy, so on and so forth. So we need to get it right. So if you look at the labor market dynamics, the labor force participation has increased. So this is the labor force participation, which you can say, of course, there has been slight decline, but it has increased if you look at overall. If you look at the unemployment rate was quite high here, but then again, you can see the unemployment rate also coming down, which is a good sign for the economy. Now, also the 4 labor codes have been released, which the government claims is going to help the workforce population. But of course, there are a lot of concerns as well. Many people argue that they make it difficult, these codes make it difficult for the people to form trade unions and for the people to protest. But at the same time, there are certain good things as well. So there are 4 different codes: code on wages, code on social security, industrial relation code, occupational safety, health and working conditions code. Then, among the labor force participation, specific emphasis is given to the female labor force participation, and that has also increased. So if you look at the female labor force participation, it has increased from 23% to 41%. If you look at the female unemployment rate, it has gone down from 5.6% to 3.2%. Now remember, there is a difference between the labor force and the workforce. Labor force means people who are either working or looking for work, and not working also are included here, whereas in workforce only those people are included who are actually working. And this labor force minus workforce gives you the unemployment, and this labor force minus workforce divided by the labor force into 100 gives you the unemployment rate. All right, moving ahead, let's move to chapter 13, that is rural development. Talks about rural development and the social development. So when you talk about the rural development, what do you think very first thing that comes in your mind with respect to rural development would be? Agriculture. Now, agriculture does not necessarily mean just talk about increasing the crop production. Of course, that will be there, but providing infrastructure, providing the infrastructure to the rural area is very important. So chapter 13 talks about rural development and social progress, from participation to partnership. So here, as I mentioned, infrastructure development would be important, and economic survey talks about it. So India's progress against poverty. Poverty has reduced in India considerably. Our extreme poverty number is how much? Just 5.3% people are extremely poor. If you talk about poverty in general, our poverty numbers have also gone down. According to World Bank, India has just 10% poverty. According to Niti Aayog, India has around 11% poverty. But if you talk about extreme poverty, it has reduced to 5.3%. India has also helped the rural development by creation of the infrastructure. And there is a scheme, Yojana, Har Ghar Jal Yojana. Please remember, it says Har Ghar Jal, but it talks about the drinking tap water only for the rural areas or the rural household. Har Ghar Jal means water in every house. But this is talking about water in every house in the rural India. So UPSC can play with this word and say that it talks about water, tap drinking water in rural and urban. No, it is for rural India. Housing for all, over 2.9 crore houses have been constructed under the Awas Yojana. Now next is chapter 14, the evolution of AI, that is artificial intelligence ecosystem in India, and what is the way forward. So in the last economic survey, they have warned us with respect to the development in the artificial intelligence, not saying that we should not do it, but making us aware as to what issues can be there in front of us. So here again, while navigating this, the economic survey talks about a trade-off. Trade-off means if you do this, this is an issue. So it's up to you whether you do it or not. This is exactly what they're saying. So if we talk about it, you have, for example, scale plus inclusion. Scale plus inclusion means if you want to grow in artificial intelligence considerably fast, there might be few companies which are growing faster, becoming bigger. Keep on helping them, facilitating them, they will grow a lot. But then what will happen? A lot of other companies, a lot of other labors, etc. will be left out. So do you want to have faster growth or inclusive growth? That is the question here. In the same manner, various other questions. For example, proprietary or open. You want it to be locked, regulated, etc. or the AI to be open, shareable with everyone. Then you have data center scale or local compute. Data center scale means you are having larger models availability, or local means small localized data centers. What do you want? Then you have regulation versus innovation. Should you regulate a lot because it can create a lot of problem, or you should give a lot of freedom so that more innovation can take place? So these are the questions in front of India, in front of us when it comes to artificial intelligence. A lot of ethics-based questions can also come under artificial intelligence. All right, let's move ahead. Chapter 15, urbanization. It talks about making India's cities work for its citizens. So making the cities better for the citizens who are living in it. So it talks about the agglomeration economy which consists of a comprehensive thing. So you will have efficient, it talks about efficient work, the job matching. The people have skills, but the jobs may not be there. The jobs are there, but people don't have the skill. So there is a skill mismatch. All those things needs to be addressed. Knowledge spillovers, sharing of infra services and specialized inputs. All these things would be focused on when you talk about developing the urban centers. Then you have one thing that the economic survey talks about is really very interesting, is the floor, you can say floor space index. This FSI means floor space index. See, what is this? You have, let's say, a land of 2000 square feet. Now, the floor space index means how much amount of construction can you do on this land. So in India, you have to leave a lot of space and not much of height you can go ahead. You may not be allowed to do that. As a result of which the floor space index in India is less. Whereas in other countries, the floor space index is very high. So if you look at the floor space index in Singapore, it's 25. That means on, let's take a bigger example, on 10,000 square feet big land, you can basically have construction of 2.5 lakh square feet because 25 is the floor space index. But in India, in different cities and regions of India, Thane, that's in Mumbai, Pune, Mumbai, this Thane is basically Navi Mumbai, outskirts of Mumbai. This is major part of Mumbai. Then Pune, Ahmedabad, Chennai, Delhi, all these things are mentioned here. We are having very less floor space index. 1, 1.3, 3, 3.4, 5 or up to 4 is what we are having in our metropolitan cities also. That means if 10,000 square feet is there, you can create up to just 40,000 square feet of construction, whereas in other countries the cities can construct even higher and higher buildings. So economic survey says that maybe it's time to increase the floor space index across the cities so that we can have higher and higher buildings that can be created. In fact, right now I'm taking this session from Bengaluru in Jayanagar in Bengaluru. This Jayanagar region is the old Bengaluru city wherein big houses are there, independent houses are there. You do not find high-rise buildings. So the utilization of the floor space is not much, but at the same time it gives you a peaceful environment, less population density and less of a fast-paced life that is usually there. So you might have to trade off the low population density with high population density. If you go for high floor space index, it might be really good for economy wise, for the development, but as a living situation or a condition, different people may have different ideas about it. Next is the non-tangible aspect of the future cities. Economic survey talks about creating future cities which has non-tangible aspect also. Non-tangible means things that you cannot see, touch or feel. So having cities which facilitates imagination. Now the cities are so congested and you are just moving ahead so rapidly, there's no time to think. But if the city is green, the city is clean, the city has clean air, right? The city is good aesthetically. All these things, places are there to come, sit and meet people, walk with people, have a morning walk, evening walk, all those things, or simply sit and enjoy the beauty of the nature. If you do all that, it is going to improve your imagination. It is going to involve you in participation of the governance system, for example. So these things should also be given focus to, is what the economic survey talks about. Now we move on to the last chapter, very small again, but broken down into two. So we will look at them, both the parts. So chapter 16 part 1, chapter 16 part 2, that's how it becomes total 17 chapters. So here you are basically talking about China's import growth and the rising per capita income. Now I have said in the beginning of the economic survey that the increase in import as such is not bad. Why? The people are having more per capita income, so they may spend, and that is what has happened with China, and that is the example economic survey has given, showcasing that import need not necessarily be bad, and with increasing per capita income, imports may increase. And this is the story of China, wherein you can see that this is the GDP per capita in green, or you can say blue. So this has increased, right? And when it has increased, along with it, what has increased? Imports have also increased. So import increasing is not a bad thing because per capita income is also increasing. So this is what part 1 talks about, and the part 2 here talks about building strategic resilience and strategic indispensability. Here the economic survey emphasis is given to the role of the state in doing so, the role of the private sector in doing so, and the economic survey also talks about the role of the households, that is the role of the citizens in doing so. And when we do so, we can be on the path of becoming Vikasit Bharat. Vikasit means developed. So we aspire to become a developed nation by 2047. I hope that's clear. So, but that is again 22 years ahead. So those visions will be there, but year on year what is happening, we should also keep a close eye on those things as well. And last but not the least, the economic survey gives us a data with respect to the implementation of the reforms. So this is what the statistics looks like. There has been over 800 reforms that have been brought in by the central government. Around 630 have been already implemented throughout the states by the states themselves. There are 119 which may not be applicable to certain regions of the states because of special status or any XYZ reason. So that is 119. But there are still 79 reforms, that is around 10%, which are still under implementation. So this is also a good number because majority of it has been implemented and only few are being left, which will again be implemented, and again we will still keep on coming with the new reforms. I hope that's clear, guys. There's no questions or doubts that have been asked. Anyway, I believe and hope that you understand everything. So that is about it from my end with respect to the economic survey. Now in the coming days, we will be doing the detailed dissection of each and every chapter that we have seen today. Plus the budget will be released on 1st of February. So we'll be coming up with a live session in the afternoon on 1st of February on our Legacy IAS Academy's YouTube channel. Thank you.